Hi guys, it's Luetin here, and I'm back with Daskro, and we have these little podcast discuss episodes from time to time. I always really enjoy them. I think that you guys do as well. Welcome back, Daskro.
Oh yeah, Luetin. Good to be back.
And we're going to be talking a few things, probably some Battlefield, probably maybe a little real world stuff, generally just whatever we feel like. So I guess we'll start with Battlefield because that's the thing always. Hardline and Hotwire, I guess, is the thing at the moment that people are sort of looking into. Hotwire, have you played it? Do you enjoy it?
Yes, I have played it, and for those that don't know, Hotwire is a game mode where it's a lot like Conquest, the traditional Battlefield franchise, except in this case, instead of capturing flags, you capture vehicles and you drive the vehicles around. And so the flags or the vehicles are constantly moving around, and you get these really great high-speed pursuits with about 2 or 3 cars, per engagement. And so you may have 4 or 5 points in a given map. So you'll have like 10 cars all driving around and fighting each other. It feels a whole lot like some of the chase scenes that you get like a Grand Theft Auto, but with more of an FPS feel to it. I really enjoy it, and I'm looking forward to that game mode specifically.
Yeah, I was quite surprised by it, to be honest. And when I was at EGX this week, pretty much I think all the Battlefield producers got to speak with Steve Papouzis, who's the executive producer on Hardline, and he's also the general manager of Visceral. And I actually said to him in the interview, I said, I've been really cynical about Hardline from the start, because I really have, I remember as well, because, often when I make predictions, I end up being right. This was not one of those times. I was categorically wrong, because I remember when people started saying, oh yeah, it's police Battlefield, I was like, that's bullshit. I was like, it'll never happen. It's a load of crap. And then, of course, it was totally true. And I was like, bollocks. Yeah,
Sucks.
so eating my words. But even then, there's this whole thing of is it a true Battlefield game? And I still have kind of felt, I don't know. And so, I went to the event and I was going to play Hardline, I was going to play Hotwire. And I got on it, sat down with it, and we started off and we were like, the guy wouldn't let us go right at the beginning because he wanted to make sure everyone would spawn in properly first. It's like, okay, Battlefield. And so I was just circling the car around, ready to go. And just that kind of, it was almost like because he wouldn't let us go. And I was getting a bit psyched. And then as soon as he was like, I was like, that's it. It's time, let's go. And I just put my foot down. And, they've changed the vehicle mechanics in Hardline for anybody that doesn't know. And the cars feel really good, really muscly. They kind of stick to the ground. And they've done some more updates with it recently, previously to when I last played. They just feel real good. And then you've got the music coming in as well. And I just really like it. The atmosphere is great. And I really enjoyed it. And just caning it around in those cars and the kind of sort of running engagement. You have people driving along, shooting out the car, and then you'd have guys, just off of the side, the little roads right there, sort of in the kind of ditches, gullies, and they pop out, RPG you, shoot you, whatever. I just really enjoyed it. It's a fast-paced game mode. It's kind of like Fluid Conquest, really, isn't it?
It is. I think Fluid Conquest is a good way of putting it, and I think that it really is a game mode that will resonate with a number of traditional Battlefield fans that want the traditional Conquest, that want that vehicle and infantry interaction. So I'm very optimistic about it, to say the least. And one of the other aspects about Hotwire that I actually have some personal aspirations for is this idea of they're going to have some 5v5 competitive game modes, and they've talked about it in some subsequent blog posts. But I could easily see Hotwire, if played a certain way, could also be competitive in its own right. I like the idea of having players that aren't just good at traditional gun skills, but also being really good at driving cars. I like that idea. There's clearly a lot of kinks to work out if that was to be a competitive angle, but boy, it would be cool to watch.
It'd be fun. I mean, it would be really furious, and it would also be, like you say, there's kind of different skill sets going on there, because it's not just about managing lanes and sort of just general gameplay skills and stuff like that. You've got to have really tight communication skills to be able to navigate, find where the people are, lock them down. You can obviously, with those kind of maps, they're not that small as compared to the 5v5s, so you need to be able to make sure that you can have your players in the right place at the right time to lock those things down. So there's that whole kind of, you don't want to end up fragmented. Yeah, I think there's a lot to that game mode, and it could be, you can imagine some knife edge finishes there where people manage to grab a car and they're taking fire, but they manage to get away, and then does that pull enough tickets back? You can't touch them, they get away. So yeah, I think there could be really some good fun there. I think it's kind of interesting, but it does bring me on. I asked earlier on Twitter. Actually, I had like a rude sort of fuck you prepared because I asked earlier like, has anybody got any questions for us on Twitter? Then like nobody was replying, and I was like, man, I'm gonna burn them in the video, but actually we had a couple, so that's good. Dustin26 said, do you think Hardline is a good direction for the Battlefield brand? And that is kind of a good question, really, because I don't know what the answer to that is. I think we really need to wait and see. It's definitely the first time they've really tried to sort of step horizontally with the brand, and I guess that could be a good or a bad thing, really. People, it's very difficult with FPS, and it's very difficult, I guess, with Battlefield, because there's this thing of kind of repetition, and we've talked about this before, where what do you add to a game that's what do you add to something that's already been established, that's the same, if you just repeat it. I mean, we saw the case with 3 and 4. People were saying, oh, it's just Battlefield 3.5, because all they've done is it's the same kind of thing. They've just upgraded the graphics and the guns and then new maps, and so of course there's a lot of other layers in there as well, but that's what people see at face value. So it is more of a sort of departure from the standard things. Do you think it's a good move, Daskro? Do you think it's a good sort of direction ahead?
Well, the question of moving horizontally, we saw Battlefield first try to do that in a few different instances before, not just one. First one comes to my mind is Bad Company, which from a sales perspective and from a community perspective was a huge success. In my mind, Bad Company was very much responsible for getting the console crowd engaged in what otherwise was a traditionally PC only title.
I suppose, yeah, that is a sideways step, isn't it? I was thinking of it more just from the militaristic point of view, but from a kind of format point of view, that was a step to the side, really.
It was, and the thematics were quite different in terms of the of what the plot was, and it had a much more of a fun kind of humorous sort of feel to it. A much greater emphasis on imagery from a gameplay perspective, a little bit of vehicle touch, but not as much as what you saw in traditional Battlefield titles. The second one in my mind was Battlefield Heroes, which was also a diversion in the sense of going to this free to play model, taking many of the core elements that we saw within the original Battlefield franchise, but almost going to a cartoony kind of level, similar to what Team Fortress 2 is, except even more cartoony than Team Fortress 2. And that, by and large, was a failure. It wasn't. I mean, it's still around, but it's
kind
not
of
something
forgotten,
that
really. It's forgotten.
Yeah, it is forgotten.
Not many people I hear talk about it. And then of course
it is, and it was a free to play model that heavily emphasized pay to win, and that was sort of, hey, free to play, we can milk this to the end, but since the game wasn't that fun, because you'd get in, and if you weren't there at the beginning or were grinding on this game for hours, you'd be playing in these servers where people have huge advantages over you, and it kind of didn't feel fun at all. And if I think it would have ramped down the free to play or the pay to win side, it may have been different. But regardless, two instances in which that's already happened. One success, one failure. I think they made a lot of money off of the Bad Company franchise, and I think that gave them enough of a confidence to look into Hardline. Now, this isn't going to be the only time they do this. I would hope that with Star Wars Battlefront, that it's also a diversion from what the traditional Battlefield franchise is, because if you were to tell me, we'll just take Battlefield 4 and take everything and then put lightsabers and walkers and stuff in it, I wouldn't think that's going to be a good title.
Yeah.
But if they're adding in some elements that are quite different from what we see in the traditional Battlefield games, then more power to them. That requires that kind of exploration. But to your point, there is this question of brand dilution. If one of these titles or both these titles flop, does that dilute the brand? And you then kind of get this question of, well, is that something that we have to be concerned about? Is that something that we that is going to be a problem? I think it in the end it boils down to whether or not the game our games are fun or not. And I know as someone who is a very much a traditionalist within the Battlefield franchise, playing the games over 10 years, there's there has been an evolution what traditional Battlefield means, and even to this day, Bad Company and Bad Company 2 are lumped together in that sort of traditional Battlefield definition.
Mm,
When as an old school kind of guy, I don't agree with that at all. But that's the nature of it. Much like how after Battlefield 1942, they abandoned the idea of large ship combat. Yeah, in Battlefield Vietnam, you had some ships, but not nearly that. More like boats. But the whole idea of being able to drive a carrier around or pilot a submarine all was sort of taken away. And we saw similar kinds of instances like that in BF2 when you had fixed AA stations or fixed machine gun stations that were everywhere to now something a little bit more sporadic, where there's a few of them here and there in BF4, but really not that many. And
mm.
and those little nuances do add up to something a little bit more significant as time progresses on. I I think there's a lot of liability in them diluting their brand with Hardline, but I
True.
think that if they can make a satisfying title that really can capture the essence of Battlefield, which I believe in Hotwire they most certainly do that, then I think they'll be good to go.
Yeah, and one of the questions I had tonight was also, have they kind of gone too far by removing, too much of the kind of stuff like tanks and all of these kind of things? But the trouble is, they can't keep that in. I mean, Steve P has said that basically that they couldn't put that stuff in because it didn't make sense. They've tried to make everything make sense within the kind of cops and robbers thematicness, and I understand that. But another way of looking at this is that sometimes when because I have seen a lot of negativity towards it, but also a lot of positivity. People are very excited about this new game, but at the same time, I think there's another way of looking at it, which is that it can be really good to take a screen break. When you have military. And it's true, like really, where can you go with that after a time? It's difficult. I mean, other than changing out the maps, changing out the guns, and maybe throwing some new game modes in, really, what can you do with that? And, if you change that out and you put in another game even 2142 was a fair departure, even though it was militaristic, it still kind of was like a departure from, I guess, what I would have termed Battlefield. Although at that time, of course, we didn't get to Bad Company yet, so it's a little bit different. But I think this actually could be a good thing from that point of view. The fact that we actually take a step away and we come out of that sort of military aspect for a little while, and then we have this kind of different game mode. And then if we revisit the military aspect, the kind of core Battlefield game after a certain amount of time, well, they have got a lot of time then to really focus it down. Maybe at that time, we may have been able to persuade DICE to actually produce a Battlefield which is going back to the core sort of Battlefield 2 multiplayer only aspect. Don't invest in the single player. Let's go all out multiplayer. Let's take everything that was good from that game, everything that's good from Bad Company, everything that we've learned through 3 and 4, and put it together to make one of the best Battlefield military games that we've ever seen. That's the kind of thing that we should really be looking at in, I guess, in the kind of weird like next 10 years. It sounds crazy talking about that sort of time scale, but unfortunately that's kind of like the length of time that these games often will take to make at the moment. When you look around at sort of some of those things that are going on there, so I don't necessarily see it as a bad thing. I think I am kind of concerned, but I have a lot of concerns all the time at the moment, to be honest, to do with balancing and community and all of these sort of things. But something that's pretty interesting? One of my subscribers / followers, LB7, linked to me on Twitter earlier this evening, and he was like, pretty interesting this, Luetin, you should check it out. And what it was a podcast that I did with Daskro Colin and Chris Red Dragon.
Back in the day.
Yeah, and it was from 2012, and it was us. It was us talking about balancing, the community, the state of the community, like how people were with the game and how YouTube was, and it was hilarious as well because right at the very beginning we start talking about like YouTube producers and stuff like this, and we mentioned we're like, oh man, and I think Daskro Colin is like he's listing a few YouTubers that he watches. And he goes, yeah, he's like, Level Cap, that guy's one to watch. just broke 100k, and it's like, wow. It's hilarious to look back and see these kind of things. But yeah, that video was really interesting to watch. And I know that I made another video with Snoov like a year later, I think, and we were talking about state of the community in 2013. And, you know, it is always really interesting because I rant a lot at the moment about objective play and community, and I get frustrated because in public games, people just don't seem to play the objective as much as I would like and all this kind of stuff. But then again, I feel like sometimes after a time, you start to get the kind of sort of clouded memories, you know? You don't remember stuff clearly as it was. You don't remember starting Arica Harbour and getting pinned down at the beginning and never getting out of there. You start to forget all of these things. In fact, actually, that's another reason why I kind of get a bit bugged sometimes by seeing all these videos being like, Bad Company was the best. And I'm just kind of like, yeah, it sort of was. It had things that were good, but there were absolutely many, many times where it was just like fail, like game after game. And it's like, it doesn't change. It's always about the players, not necessarily just the mechanics, you know? And so you can take all the best things and put it all into the game, but if the people are still like spinning around at base and C4ing their tank, like, it's not going to make for a very good game. So I think it is interesting to look back, but it's great. It's weird looking back and listening to these videos that I recorded like 2 years ago, and I'll link it below for anybody that wants to watch it, even though it's another hour podcast. But yeah, it's really fascinating to look back and you hear the sort of discussions and you think, that could absolutely be right now. Although interestingly, there's a great analogy there as well, which is, you know, I think I've seen many quotes from many different periods in history, and they're always trying to catch people out. And it's like, you know, when do you think this statement was said? And it's always stuff like, you know, the youth of today, you know, can't be controlled, and there's drunk people, and, you know, we don't have enough work, and all these terrible things. And it's like from like, you know, 1700 or something like this. There was a fantastic one. I remember a great quote, and it was like, you know, the kids don't obey their parents anymore, and, you know, times are hard and all this kind of stuff. And it was from like, you know, Egyptian time, basically, you know. And it's like, wow, okay, so nothing changes. And, you know, I think really that analogy is it can be applied to almost anything. It's kind of like people don't change, and I think that's very much like with games. I mean, that might seem a little grandiose to pull it back down to that, but it's true. You know, people don't change. People have this way of being, and I think it doesn't really go away. I remember playing COD 4, and one of the reasons why I'd left WoW and I went to COD 4 because of the balance, because I just wanted to play, I wanted to get back in FPS, and I wanted to just play like, you know, shooting and just do my thing. I didn't want to have to rely on like a huge guild like I did in WoW. And then one day I lost it because I was playing like Bog, and my team were literally just doing nothing, and we were just getting screwed into the ground from like point to point, and I just lost it. I was like, fuck's sake. And it's just like, I need people to play with. I can't play by myself anymore. And, you know, unfortunately, that's how it is. Public games, that was like, wow, I mean, how many years ago was COD 4 now? Like 8 years ago? It's like a long time ago. And, you know, from then till now, it's still been the same. You know, you try to play a public game from then or now, it's still the same. And so I think you do get this kind of memory cloud where you just remember things differently, and it doesn't really change. But I don't know, from your point of view, I know obviously you're into the you know, the more competitive side of things, and actually Level BF started doing their new 32, or not 32, 16. Or is it? No, actually, it is 32.
Yeah, it's 32.
Yeah, it's 64. Okay, sorry, 64. So you're doing that every Saturday now, and that's kind of, it's not competitive, right? It's just an organized thing.
Yeah, it's just an organized thing. So for those who don't know, it's basically it's about 3 or 4 hours. We play with 2 teams. If you want to sign up, you go to lowbf.com. You sign up. You get assigned with the teams. You get assigned a squad on TeamSpeak. You actually talk about what objectives you're playing. You work together in completing these specific objectives, and it's actually a lot of fun. It's kind of what, in our minds, what 32 vs 32 really should feel like is this combined arms battle.
Exactly. And, you know, it's great, but also kind of sad that it's left to people like yourself and me sometimes when I run stuff with the server to, you know, to do these things. We end up kind of having to pull it back. I find it kind of depressing in a way, but I don't want to be too down about it. But I find it kind of frustrating. And, you know, I actually saw earlier, there's all this talk about M16A3 coming back into the game, and I'm just like, oh, for God's sake, please no. And it's like, it's not about the gun itself, it's more about what it represents. And like I saw Matt the Musketeer had posted a little straw poll earlier this evening or yesterday, I don't know, and he basically said, should the M16A3 come back into Battlefield or not? And it had about 1,000 votes, and 90% were, yeah, bring it back. And I was just like, oh, for God's sake. It's like, I want to hear what you think about this, but for me, the M16A3 is just like, it's not about the gun itself. The gun itself was always sort of middle of the road, and that's what made it good, I guess, because it was full auto, it performed well in close quarters and at medium range. Therefore, for a lot of situations, it performed really well. So it was a great median weapon to go with, and therefore a lot of people gravitated towards it. But what became really bad was when people started identifying it and highlighting it as like, this is the gun that you do always do well with. And then it doesn't even matter about the stats or anything anymore. It's just about the fact that everybody starts going towards it. And it just means that you get very repetitive styles of gameplay. And for me, that's the thing that's really damaging. And I don't want to see that. It's like, if they bring it back in the game, people are going to gravitate towards it. Even if some people today messaged me on Twitter and said like, oh, well, Luetin, what if they nerf it a bit? And therefore it's not so good. Wouldn't you be happy then to see it come back? And I'm like, well, what's the point? If you're going to nerf it anyway, that's to the point to discourage people, then why put it in the game at all, you know? And if you're going to bring it back and it's as good as it was before, in which, you know, it's kind of, it performs so well over all situations, that means that we're just going to see a lot of people using it. And again, you get back to that kind of repetitive, tedious gameplay because you're facing the same style of situation constantly. And it's got like this stigma attached to it because of that now. So it's like people always like M16A3, they just associate it with it's the thing to use. And so I just feel for that reason it's not a good thing. I feel like it's got this kind of detrimental stigma attached with it, and I just dislike it for that reason. But what do you think about it?
Well, I think that the desire for this M16A3 to be put back in the game is more emblematic of the fact that in the past Battlefield games that have come out, balancing for the infantry classes has been as such where you have a go-to gun that is so robust in how well it operates across a variety of situations, majority of situations for that matter, that everyone begins to use it, and what ends up happening is that most people may end up using it because everyone else is using it. Some may end up using it because they've done that kind of calculation with almost sort of like what the Synthic guys do. But in the end, it's something that that to me represents a larger problem, which is there is not enough balance within the game to justify a variety of viable weapon selection. Much like how there's that in a vast majority of the maps for a vast majority of the players, there's only one class they need, and it's medic. And and that actually lends an interesting question, because this isn't. I don't believe that the M16A3 situation happened on purpose. I believe it happened because things were restrained in a way, and how the development of Battlefield progresses, where you had to create a variety of balanced guns between essentially two different user interfaces, mouse and keyboard being one, and then the game pads on console. And why is that a big deal? It's a big deal because from a how that gun is configured in terms of its recoil and its rate of fire and its and what tendency of how it moves to the left or right or up and down. That's the same between console and PC, and because of that, that means that a gun that may be extremely viable in PC, M16A3, actually isn't that viable at all within next-gen console or current-gen for that matter. Whereas just the opposite, where there may be guns that are just completely worthless within PC, but are actually quite powerful within on a gamepad. And the reason being is that gamepad has a different methodology how you control your movements and how you control your aim. You have it, you have basically a dead space on that analog stick, and you're moving relative to a zero dead space. Whereas a mouse is just the opposite. It's just taking coordinates on an XY position and where they are relative to where the last coordinate was, and that makes balancing extremely difficult. And one of the things that I had asked one of the Dice LA designers in this was, do you see a future in Battlefield 4 will you separate the configurations of how the guns operate between PC and next gen? To which they said, hey, in the current architecture and how we developed BF4, the answer is no. So we're going to continue to have this problem as long as they're using the same architecture as they currently are using. Now, I can understand from a development standpoint, it'd be a whole lot easier to just have one configuration system for all the platforms that they're on. But I suspect that that until it becomes such a problem where, hey, we got to get balancing right, they're not going to go to that route. You're asking for a whole lot more work to be done, not only in the front end in terms of developing the engine and how the configuration system operates, but it also requires a whole lot more people to worry about balancing. Someone to focus on next gen or excuse me, console, and others to focus on PC. That's not a. I'd love to see that going forward in the future, but because of those design decisions, we're gonna continue to have exactly what you described until they change it, because that's just the nature of what we're dealing with. Now, if both console and PC migrate to a third user interface system that's not gamepad and not mouse and keyboard, but that's unified, then the whole conversation changes. But until then, that's it. We're going to continue to see these problems, and I don't actually like it, but it's something that we have to recognize and at its time currently.
I think it was actually really interesting that I remember, I don't know if it was actually a live stream we were doing where I remember it was Level BF. I don't know whether I was just watching or whether we were actually casting, but I do remember that we were basically, I think it was cast, I think I was watching maybe, I can't remember, but it was basically, we noticed that you had events for console players and also for the PC players, and the console guys, we suddenly noticed, were using totally different weapons that you wouldn't see PC people using, and they were kicking ass with them as well. You know, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was weapon choices, and you were like, wow, they're going with that choice, really? And then they were doing really well with it. And it's because, the handleability, the way in which you control using the gamepad was totally different. However, I will say that the M16A3, it did do very well still on the console. And the reason I tell you is because people that remember when I was with PlayStation, I had my little group of guys that I used to run with all the time, Caius and the rest of those guys. And Caius would always run M16A3 because he was just like, it was both those guys, and they were just about, they wanted to just do the best that they could do, and that's why they chose that gun. And in many ways, I almost feel like the weapons in the game, the best thing for them is for them to have their own characteristics. But that's very difficult because there are so many weapons. And, Daskro, I mean, you are big on weapons. You own a lot of guns, and obviously there's a lot of variety there. There's a lot of characteristics with all of them. I mean, obviously in the game, for example, you talked again before about attachments and how they seem to be just kind of like doubled up but don't really serve any real purpose, which I find intensely irritating. I'm just like, well, I'll choose this or this because they're basically the same, It's very, very annoying. But, from your experience with real firearms and the fact that, like I say, you've got a large variety of different things and you've handled a lot of different weapons, and so the feel and the characteristics in which they handle. Would you prefer to see less weapons, or would you prefer to see them have more refined, maybe in some cases, sort of slightly more exaggerated characteristics or some more detail there? There's always the worry of Battlefield is not armor. We don't want to see that level of complexity there. So in my mind, the automatic solution to that is let's have less guns, but let them have more individual characteristics. And I think I remember having this conversation again with some of the guys from Visceral, and we were talking back about COD 4 and about how in COD 4 you remembered every weapon's characteristic. Think about the MP5, think about the RPD, think about the M40. All of them. Obviously those guns are all very different, but even within their own classes, whether it be an SMG, LMG, sniper, assault rifle, whatever, all the guns within Call of Duty 4 had very individual characteristics. You knew when you picked up that gun that it wasn't like the other guns. Whereas in Battlefield, I often look down through the assault rifles and I'm just like, well, it could be this or this. It doesn't really matter, you know. And I have said many times before that basically a lot of the times in Battlefield, I'll be running around doing whatever I'm doing, and I run out of ammo. There's no support guy near. I just pick up the gun of the guy I just killed and carry on, and it makes almost no difference to me whatsoever. I mean, what do you think? Do you think less guns, more tight characteristics? What would your sort of preference be to kind of go in that direction?
My answer is going to be highly dependent on what you're really trying to accomplish
Okay,
as a gameplay design.
okay. The gameplay design that I would go towards then is more, you know, a more refined balance in terms of people's choices on the ground. And what I mean by that is to not have that situation like we do with the M16A3 where people gravitate towards it because it performs well in all situations. It should be a kind of, I mean, Battlefield has always been a rock, paper, scissors game, and the weapon should replicate that. It should be that you choose a gun which performs well in some situations but not in others. The reason being is that way it provides more interesting gameplay, and it doesn't mean that you just kind of have this median where, like right now, I feel like I could pick up any gun and it really doesn't matter. Do you know what I mean? That's really where I'm going towards.
Yeah, I do. And my take on it is, if I were of the opinion that we wanted to continue to create various forms of extrinsic motivators within the game to keep people continuing playing the game. So adding different kinds of gadgets that you can add to your gun, or different types of camo, or just while playing the game, unlocking a greater variety of guns. Then I'm all for the idea of having a lot of guns in the game, because in the end, what you're trying to accomplish is you're trying to continually create an environment in which the person that is playing is entertained or intrigued, or has some kind of sensory input coming in that gives them a form of enjoyment. I would go so far as to say it's not so different than going to a casino and playing slot machine and seeing all these lights and
Yeah.
noises, and even though that you bet $1 and you only got 10 cents back, the game makes it sound like that you just did a great job, and it
That's
provides
so
the motivation. It provides motivation for you, and now, and that's actually especially good if you want to sell like DLC content and everything that's around those lines in the short term. But I personally have a huge problem with that, and here's why I have a huge problem with that. I have a huge problem with it because there are many studies that have shown that extrinsic motivators as a means to get people continue playing a game actually do the opposite. They get really, really excited and they have a really good time playing the game for a short duration. But if there's not a path forward to either more extrinsic motivators, or alternatively a intrinsic motivator, which is to say playing the game for the sake of enjoying the game, then you end up getting people that just stop playing the game, or worse, and this is, I think, even more worse than stop playing the game. You get people that don't actually get any better in terms of their skill set because they are not interested in actually refining themselves. They're under the illusion that I'm actually playing better because I'm grinding out on this gun to get another camo unlock or to get another gadget unlock. When in reality, and this is my perspective as someone who played the Battlefield franchise at the highest levels of competition for several years, that the nuances of guns are so minute compared to what the differences in skill of playing the game generally, having good map awareness, having good situational awareness,
Yeah.
working together as a team.
Yeah.
That it really doesn't matter. If you were to take 5 people who have been playing regularly and organized competitive games, not even like the best players out there, but just folks that play level
Yes.
BF as an example, and give them the shittiest guns as determined by popularity, and put them against 5 pubbers who are playing the best guns, the 5 pubbers are going to lose. They're going to lose because
Yes.
it's not just about what the nuances of the guns are. And
Yes.
in fact, I have there's a graphic that I've linked
Okay.
in the TeamSpeak that you may want to check out. And this is one that has nothing to do with games, but has everything to do with the idea of having the best kind of gear in the military. We have this idea
That's so true.
that the gear matters so much, but in reality, experience matters a whole lot more. And
Yes.
only when you look at the highest levels of experience, does the gear actually become something? This isn't to say that gear isn't irrelevant for really terrible players. Having a better gun may give them a little bit of advantage, but for everyone else, it really doesn't matter that much. And
Yeah.
so, what I would rather see, as opposed to a bunch of additional guns, is that I'd rather see additional forms of intrinsic motivation put into the game, which in my mind is about having a fun and balanced experience, not in terms of the gear, but in terms of who you're playing against and who you're
Yeah.
playing with. By having that kind of of situation, which is pretty commonplace in games like Hearthstone and in games like StarCraft 2, and even in games like League of Legends and other MOBAs out there, Dota 2, that is the balancing that takes place is not insignificant. And and so when you want to team up with two or three of your friends to play those kind of games, the system's going to realize that, wow, you're team stacking this with three of your friends all playing the same. We're going to put you into a match in which it's not going to be a pub stomp. You're going to you may win, you may lose, but it's going to be a close game regardless. We don't have that in Battlefield, and we don't have that in most first-person shooters. And if and when someone can solve that kind of issue, which I think it is certainly solvable, then this question of how many guns will probably go by the wayside, because it'll be less about, yeah, I like this gun, I like that gun, and more about, I'm having a fun competitive experience constantly, and I want to continue playing the game on the virtues of that, and not on I'm playing certain guns because I want to get them unlocked or things around those lines. In fact, look at games like Counter-Strike, that is a huge first-person shooter. Their number of guns is actually pretty small relative to other
Yeah.
titles, but
Yeah.
that's okay because they do a really good job of balancing and go from there. In my mind, if I could accomplish what I just described as a developer, I wouldn't put as many guns in. I wouldn't
Yeah.
need to. Now that being said, doing what I described is extremely difficult, and on top of that, the ability to get to monetize that is a little bit more difficult because in that respect, if you're not successful at creating what I just described, you're not going to have a big user base that actually ends up wanting to play, the fourth or fifth DLC expansion.
True, but if
Those
you keep that player base, if you create that situation, if you make it strong, then hopefully you end up with a very, very strong community and a player base which support whatever you do. And I guess that's something
Yeah,
that
and that's to me that's the crown jewels, because if I put on my big game corporation hat on,
Hmm.
if you're telling me that by pursuing those strategies that I am going to have a user base 30 or 40% larger than what I would have otherwise, because
Hmm.
take in mind, just because 10 million people buy BF4 doesn't mean 10 million people are playing it a year from now.
Yeah.
It means that you may have a million, you may have less than a million that are playing it in 12 months after you began sales. But and the reason why it's significant is that if you have a DLC that comes out a year later, you're more likely than not going to only sell to that 1 million player base that's active, and of which you may get a good sampling of them that end up buying it, 78%. But to put it another way, that means that you're only getting an 8% adoption rate from your installed base of 10 million people that you've sold to. That's not good. But if you were to say you were 40 or 50% larger as a community, not a million strong, but 4 million strong, that's actually more than 43%. Let's just say 4 million strong, 300-400% larger, 4 million people, and 75% adoption rate. That's 3 million. That's a whole lot more DLC sales than what you'd get if you had a much smaller user base. Now, I'm not saying that this is going to reap 400% increase in user base, but even a small increase in user base, I think justifies it.
Yeah,
That's
I think it's a more tenable sort of long-term plan, really, isn't it? I feel like it would be the stronger way to go, and I feel like the gear aspect and all of this DLC, it's I just think it doesn't play out as I would imagine it would be a positive thing to do. And coming back to the stuff about the gear isn't important, I'll definitely include that little graphic, but yeah, I've said this for the longest time. It really winds me up. And also, when I used to do my videos talking about different tactics and all this kind of stuff, And people would always say like, but this is really basic, Luetin. Where's the advanced tactics? And I'm just kind of like, the advanced tactics have minimal impact. You know, it's not about that. If you can have good core communication, good situational awareness, good prioritization of targets, if you just get those things really good, then the rest is super easy. You know, anything advanced, if you want to call it that, from there on out, should be only used in kind of like specialist situations, because the rest of the stuff should just take care of all of that for you. And it's one reason why I kind of despise loadout videos, and I've talked about this before. And you know, loadout videos just kind of get on my nerves, because the point of them is so irrelevant. It's like people love to see them for a reason that I can't fathom. I think it's because people genuinely believe, it's the only reason I can imagine, that people genuinely believe that by choosing a loadout that somebody else has said is good will make them a better player. And I find that such a fallacy. Like it's just bollocks. Like, it's just crap. You know, if somebody says like this gun and this thing, and here's an example of me getting like 50-0 in a round with it, and I came top of the boards, and everyone's gonna be like, holy shit, that's the one that's the key, you know, that's the best loadout. It's bullshit, you know. It doesn't mean anything, because if that player goes into that round and he's just like, I'm going to A, and then like 3 guys jump out and he doesn't see them or whatever, or his teammate who he always plays with behind doesn't call it out, they're all dead. You know, it doesn't make any difference. And I've said this so many times, it's like you can choose like the best kit, the best gun, whatever you want to call it. But if you get shot in the back, it makes fuck all difference, you know? And it's like, I remember discussing with Level Cap about this ages ago and talking about the guns, and I was like, dude, there's very little difference in the guns, and Level's point of view is valid. He always used to say that, like, well, yeah, but in a one-on-one situation, those small tweaks between the weapons and the loadouts make the difference between whether you survive or not. That is true. But my kind of counter point of view with that is, how often does that happen? Like, how often do you end up in a one-on-one situation with another player and where that gun comes down to the wire of the micro differences between them or the loadout that you've chosen? It's so rare that I just feel it doesn't happen that often. It only happens on...
I most certainly agree with that. And
Yeah.
because what you're describing is that this sort of duel at the OK Corral, where that's not right. But the idiom is in terms of having a shootout.
Yeah.
But in reality, that's not what happens.
It does happen sometimes, but it's so infrequent. You know, most of the time you would turn a corner, it's a fucking tank. You know, it's like, right. So yeah, go on.
Yeah, that's right. And because of that, I find those kinds of arguments, frankly, they become an argument of hypotheticals that really don't speak to how people play the game and how they react, what their reactions like, what their map awareness is, and the like. And I think for many players out there, that they seek out these loadout videos. And part one, they're entertaining, but two, it gives them a ability to say, oh, okay, here's a path forward that I don't have to discover on my own, because that is what this looks like a reasonable approach. I'm going to go this approach. Now, I think this buys into this whole fallacy that, oh, with a good gear loadout, I'm going to be more successful, when in reality, a lot of players are not given the right kinds of motivations to increase their skill set, and as such, they are stuck in this limbo of, I'm not that good at the game, and that maybe if I just get this next unlock for a potato grip, I'll be better, or whatever it may be. And to me, that's a really and I may actually offend people by saying this. To me, that's an extremely consumeristic approach to how to play games, because what that
I thought you were going to say something really bad there. I was like, oh my god, here it comes, and then it's like, go on.
Well, I think it's a consumeristic approach, because it goes into this idea that if I buy something or if I use something, I am going to be better at something, or I'm going to have outcomes or effects that in reality have no association with it. I mean, in that respect, I find it to be, it doesn't actually help people. It may provide a little bit of incremental improvement for it, but whatever incremental improvement is taking place maybe them just grinding through it and trying to figure out how to play a little bit better and learning a few nuances here and there about the maps or about who they're playing with or against, and I would attribute that more to the outcomes than any specific kind of loadout.
Yeah.
But like everything else in life, learning how to do something better in terms of a skill is not easy, and it's a whole lot easier to buy into this idea that if I drink this protein shake or buy this really expensive golf club or buy these pair of tennis shoes, that I am gonna be better at it. No,
Quick
you're
fix.
not.
Quick fix, you know.
And that may upset a lot of people for me saying that, but if you want to be better at the game, you have to constantly challenge yourself and put yourself in a position where you may or may not lose. And that is why I focus so much on this idea of having close, competitive, balanced games, because those are the games in which if you're going to play a game where you are going to barely win or barely lose each time for 100 games straight versus playing 100 games where you just have a blowout versus being annihilated, where you have a few games that are close, but by and large they're not. The guy who is playing 100 games that they're all close games is going to be a better player after those 100 matches than the one that didn't. And that's just the nature of it. But creating those kind of outcomes of 100 games where you can have a close match each time, that's not practically possible right now and how the system is set up. But if we had a matchmaking system or a ladder-based system or some other system that created a balanced environment for both teams on given maps, then we could have that. And that's why I I emphasize it so much. I actually want people to be better players, but simply thinking that a better loadout's going to make them better is significantly better, at least. I think it's wrong. Now, I'm not saying that they're not going to be even a little bit better. They're going to have a slightly better KDR. They're going to do slightly better in the games. But when a majority of the population you're playing against, by definition, is average, and if you're an average, then 50% of the people you're going to play against are going to be really bad. And so it's not. I don't find that to be a big improvement of things. That's not in the way that it should be, because that doesn't solve this issue of getting people to play the game, continue to enjoy the game in the long term. You want people to have that experience.
Yeah. And I have had, a good example of this. It's kind of like a reverse of the M16A3, like we were talking about earlier. And the M16A3 having this kind of iconic sort of it's the best stigma, even if it's not. The G36 it used to be like a reasonable weapon. Obviously in Battlefield 4, it's not the best weapon. And the stats do back that up. However, it does go back to what I've said before and today about the fact that the stats don't always make it something a useless weapon. And I kind of wanted to deliberately highlight this because I one day I was like, do you know what? I'm going to use the G36 and I'm going to prove that you can do totally fine with it. And we played these games and we played Domination, we played Conquest, and I wanted to try infantry and then just also vehicle situations. And again, on a Conquest map, there's not that many engagements that you have that are infantry based a lot of the time. You're moving around pretty fast. You might have kind of spot on and off contact, and a lot of the time, because it's kind of moving, defending, you kind of push, stop, move, and you're kind of moving around the map. So a lot of the times you're either set up or you're going to a position which is being already highlighted or whatever. So you may have some kind of information about that. That information, providing you're working together as a squad and a team, will enable you to kind of predispose how you're going to approach that situation. And so I would often come into a base knowing kind of, okay, so they're roughly here, they're first floor, they're ground floor, they're at the back, they're at the front, and therefore understanding how the G36 operates, how fast its fire rate is, and what its kind of, useful, for me, accurate, effective ranges, I can then sort of think, okay, well, I'm going to try and come at it like this. And, I performed, I would say, averagely with that weapon, and I still ended the round with like a 3-1 KD, and it was totally fine. But I was just like, so you can perform totally fine with that gun. And the reason being, providing you understand it, and providing you know how to approach the situation, and providing you have those basic tenets of like, situational awareness, working together as a team, prioritization, communication, you have those things going on and you understand them and why they're important, you're going to do just fine. It doesn't matter what you have. You could have a BB gun, it just doesn't matter. Another thing, when we come back to talking about sort of, you were saying about having these close games. Now, I love close games. In fact, on this channel, you can go back through and look. I think you just type in like knife edge close game. I've had so many which have been amazing. Like we had like 1,000 ticket round come down to 1 ticket. That's a close game, and it's like, there's nothing, it's not even about like just overall gameplay quality either. It's just about having those moments that you don't get anywhere else. A steamroll, everyone's just like GG, whatever. They're like watching TV at the same time. Nobody cares. It's just like you knew it was going to happen halfway through the game. But when you have these close games, everyone's playing full on right to the end, and it gets to like that 1 ticket, and then it ticks over, and because it's usually at that time based on a kill, you don't know at the end whether anybody actually won the game or not, and so it ticks over to who's going to win, and you're like, and then you win, and you're like, yes, and it's like the best feeling, and you never get that anywhere else. But also, from that point of view, coming back on sort of losing, there's 2 things I want to say. One is, it always has pissed me off when I played in squads, and this applies to not just Battlefield, but other games that I've played in as well. And usually the squads that I'm playing with are people that know what they're doing, and they're pretty good players. And in the case of some of the games I played in the past, very, very good players, often best players around. And it used to piss me off that we would play like 5, 6, 10, 20 games in a row, and we'd sort of steamroll a lot of the time, because the games we were playing at the time just dictated the fact that we were a lot better as a squad. And that's not me being big-headed, it's literally just a fact. Like, we kicked ass, and we would just be like bam, 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 just kick them all around. And then we would come up against a team which was a challenge. They got their shit together, they were pretty good, and sometimes it didn't go our way. We got complacent, we would lose it, they'd get round us or whatever. And then at the end of that round, because we didn't win, everyone was like, oh, I've got to go get some food or whatever. And I'm just like, oh, that is bullshit. Like, you're just leaving because you had a slightly challenging game. And it kind of comes back to what you were saying about how if you have like a steamroll, and you're not really learning anything there. You're not really doing good, because the people you're up against are no challenge. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're a good player. It just means that they're not presenting enough of a challenge to you, which comes back to why it would be really beneficial to have some kind of actually constructive matchmaking or ladder system, which does put players together of a similar quality, so you don't end up in those ridiculous situations where you just kind of walk over everybody constantly. But also, it kind of brings me back to the sort of negativity that surrounds, and I don't know whether this is just an FPS thing, and I don't know whether this is a recent thing either, actually, because I haven't really thought about it that much. But what I do find is that when I'm talking about loadout videos, and we're talking about like specific kits and specific guns and things to bring back into the game, perhaps there's a lot of talk about other, bringing things back and what's the best and what should we do and all this kind of stuff. And the thing is that there's just like a lot of negativity, and sort of people don't see losing or not doing well in a round as a constructive thing. And this also goes into what I've talked about in a video recently, and the feedback I gave to DICE about objective play and point scoring, and how you don't have to be top of the board to be a constructive good player for your team. And if just because you lose a round, it doesn't mean that that wasn't a good game. Because I've always said I'd rather have a close game where you lose than a good game where you sort of like, just steamroll, where a winning game where you just steamroll the enemy. A loss, which was a better fight, is a more valuable round and a more interesting round to me. And that's why, again, on this YouTube channel, I always try to my best ability to post most, if not all, of the gameplay of rounds that I play. It often is a bit detractive to me in terms of making videos, because they end up being like 25 minutes long, but it does enable people to see how the round actually went down, and not be just the selected highlights where I got a 5 kill, in a row. It enables me to showcase like how things go, and it shows that you don't always do well. You have times where you go on ridiculous kill streaks, You get crazy shots, you cap objectives really well, but then other times you turn a corner and they're right there in front of you, and you have you're just down on the ground, And that was happening to me this week when we were playing games. We had a few games and we won the games and we did really good, but in those games we had moments where we were pinned back. We couldn't do anything. We were really screwed. But then the key, and what I really feel is missing in a lot of YouTube stuff, is that they don't show that ability of being able to turn those situations around. So you only ever see the good, and then in that sense, it means that you don't get this kind of holistic picture, and it means that people don't learn. And I've always said, and it's true, that you learn a lot more from your mistakes than you do from the wins, and that's another sort of reason why I post this kind of gameplay. So again, I guess it really comes back to, though, this idea of changing things, and everyone's getting a bit het up about sort of bringing this back or bringing that back, or what are we going to change? And I've seen many videos, and I haven't made one myself, although I'd like to, but for different reasons. People saying like Bad Company was the best, and here's the reasons why. And it's always like mechanical reason number 1, mechanical reason number 2. And that's always what it is. It's always like this kit did the best thing, or this mechanic did the best thing. And it's like, it's not true. Like, those mechanics didn't make the game. For one reason, the reason games like Bad Company and Battlefield 2 were a lot better is because the community was a lot smaller and a lot more specialist. And so the people coming to play the game were more up for playing. That's why those games were better. It's not because they had the tracer dart. It's not because there was more destruction. It's not because just the map design. It's because the people playing were more geared up to play the game. They were more geared up to actually play the fucking objective and not just sit back or dick around or jump off of something with a C4 quad bike. It's because they were up for playing the game. And that's what has been lost. It's not about all the other stuff, which is almost secondary. It's about the player base. And even though I have said in multiple videos, right, like we started today, and I was saying about last year and the year before, the gameplay in terms of people getting in on the game hasn't really changed. You still always have rounds where people don't perform well or they're not up for it. That is totally true. But the thing is that because those player bases were smaller, those players still existed, but it happened less frequently. Now we have a much larger player base because the games have become much more populated and much more popular, I should say, and much more marketed. And so there is a large community now, and therefore the quantity of players which are sort of not up for really pushing and playing the objective, or simply, but nothing against these people, maybe they just haven't got a lot of experience with the game, and so they're not so aware of what to do in the game. And so I don't really know what the solution is. And I've talked about we could make changes to the objective and this and this and this. I just don't know. I mean, Daskro, do you think that we're capable of getting back to what we were with, like Battlefield 2? I mean, obviously, I guess anything's capable, but do you think realistically in the next game or the game after, we're going to get back to where we were because of all the... I would just say quantity of players now, and there's that kind of sort of almost diminishing returns of player base.
Well, I most certainly think that with the change of number of players over the last 7-8 years on both PC and on console, in terms of more people playing it, it changes what those outcomes are going to look like when you play individual rounds. Not saying that this is necessarily a good thing or bad thing. I actually just view it as with a greater number of people, you have a greater variety of skill sets and distributions, and as such, that's going to have an impact on what you're going to experience. I mean, I very much believe this idea that skill is very much on a bell curve, where you have a portion of the population that may be super good, but you're talking about 0.0001% of the player base out there, whereas people that may be 6 out of 10 in terms of being good, that may represent anywhere between 30 to 40% of the game population. And as such, as that overall population increases, the ratio between those also increases well accordingly, just from a statistics standpoint. In this respect, it really only, in my mind, emphasizes why you need to be able to continue to entice those larger player bases and the skills that they have in playing the game, which means creating more variety, creating more incentives, making it more accessible. But you will alienate some of your your player base on the fringes, and on top of that, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're actually going to create that longevity if those players don't actually continue playing, regardless of who they are and where they fall within that bell curve. This is why I emphasize so much this idea of balancing in terms of actually having close matches, because there's nothing wrong with taking a bunch of people that are all maybe in the lower percentile of skill, maybe a 3 out of 10 or 4 out of 10, and have them all play each other. If anything, they're going to get better because they're going to be playing against people of their same skill set. And it also does this secondary thing. This is what I think is really cool about it, is that it also removes them from both games that in which they are woefully underskilled for, which is to say that they are they're not that good relative to that larger that other player base that may be playing in those given matches, and as such.
And if I can just say as well, that's not to say or be negative about those players. It's not to say like, man, they suck, they're the worst. You know, when Daskro's talking about this, he's not being negative towards those players. It's just that everybody has a different skill set. And, you know, we all have seen people, and you end up in a round, and they're like 2-20 by the end of the round, and they're just getting kicked all over the place. And I have real life friends who they love games, but they're just not at that level. One of my friends, he said, like, I just don't play multiplayer online because he just can't stand up to those. And he's not embarrassed about it or, like, you know, pissed off or anything like that, but it's just not enjoyable for him. And it's going to be better for them, and it's been better for us if we have an actual balancing system in place. And again, as I say, it's not a personal thing. It's not about sort of deriding those people and saying like, oh, you suck, so you're going in the kiddies section. It's not about that. It's just about making sure that we have a more balanced playing field for everybody, and therefore the quality of gameplay for everybody goes up, right?
I most certainly think so as well. When you look at a system like StarCraft 2, where you have you have your top 200, you have your masters, you have your platinum, your diamond, your silver, your gold, all these different leagues and ladders. I mean, there isn't 10 bronze ladders and then 10 silver ladders and 10 gold ladders. For every one platinum ladder, there will be 1,000 bronze ladders. Or there'll be a few hundred gold ladders, and that's because the distribution of skill is not linear. It actually it's going to drastically drop off in terms of your player base, but you do that because you want to be able to create a uniform environment for a vast majority of players. And as such, when people play in silver, yeah, they're going to have a tough time, but they can eventually get up to gold, and they're going to feel like they really accomplished something. Or alternatively, they may say, hey, I'm actually quite content on being, top 5 in a silver bracket. And they'll be okay with that. And if they don't want to go to that next level of being to gain more skill in terms of abilities, then they can stay in that ladder, and which means they're going to continue to have fun, and they're not going to be disappointed that they're in their place and that's all they have. And so I think that solves a lot of the problems out there. But again, this issue or this methodology that I described has not been implemented in first-person shooters effectively in the past, and so it's not easy at all. But it's something that does begin to remedy these sorts of situations, because Battlefield as a game is not competing against Call of Duty. Yeah, it is in the sense that it's both first-person shooters, but what Battlefield is really competing for is the time that people are willing to commit, and their money for that matter, if they want to buy the AAA title, to continue playing the game. And they are not offering this game in a vacuum. There are many other games out there beyond first-person shooters that can take people's time. And I think that the developers need to look hard and long at the fact that, yeah, they'll be successful in selling this title, but if it's about maintaining that user base over time, they're competing against free-to-play games, from MOBAs to RTS games to MMORPGs, and they provide different motivators and that get people interested in playing the game and continue to play in the game.
Yeah, and let me just say as well, when we're talking about sort of the percentages and the way people are with games, let's not be clear about it. It's not just FPS. It's everything, right? And I went to EGX this week in London, and I have a great example which perfectly highlights this. I went to the new Total War Attila game, which
Cool.
it looks really, really awesome. And it's been great because I've been meeting a lot of the Creative Assembly guys through Alien Isolation. And so I went down there, and there was a couple of guys. I was like, "Hey guys, how's it going?" And we were talking about the game. And I've not played RTS for quite a while. I started playing a bit of Company Heroes recently, but I'm not good as you, so I haven't challenged you yet because I don't want to get ruined. But I love RTS games. They're great. They're really strategic, and they really, you've got to be really tight with your management skills, but you've also be, quick and accurate, and you've got to understand exactly what's going on and what's happening. Now, as I say, I haven't played RTS games for ages, so coming into Total War, and again, it's been a while since I played a Total War game, so I kind of knew what was going on, but I didn't know, everything. It's literally been years, since I've really played a proper RTS game. So I kind of came in, and they sat me down. It was early in the morning, and I was like, okay, so let's get on with this, and sets up the mission, and you're basically in a castle, and you have reasonably limited troops, and you don't have any kind of siege weapons, and you're being attacked, and the guys are already coming for you, and so you've got to make some quick decisions straight away about what's going to happen there. First thing to do, assess the situation, assess the kind of geography of like where you are, work out what units you're going to place where, and get them moving. Did all this. I let them come into me. I used the bottleneck of the castle. I flanked them, took out their archers, came around, surrounded the rest of the guys, caught them in the bottleneck, slaughtered them all, went out, finished off the siege weapons, and completed the round. I also stopped a flank by sending one unit across as well and put them defensive. So that worked really good, and that was just like bam, bam, bam. Now, to me, just as a person who kind of generally, that's not complicated strategy. That's pretty ABC stuff. It's like go here, take them out, blah blah blah. And I was just like, oh, okay. But I was sort of looking at the game and the graphics, and I was like, oh, this is all done really nicely. So I was looking at the kind of overall things. Anyway, I didn't think it was a particularly big deal at the time. What I had done, because I was just like, okay, so here, yeah, it's pretty, as I say, ABCs. It's just the basics of understanding like how to move your troops and the things to prioritize. You take out the archers with the cavalry because they're weakest. It's rock paper scissors. Anyway, I got out the other side, and I was talking to the guy, and he was like, "Oh," and he was like, "Yeah, well done." And I was like, "Oh," well, it was enjoyable." And he was like, "No, seriously." He was like, out of about 350 people, he was like, "You're only one of 5 who's actually completed the thing." And I was like, "Are you taking the piss?" Because I was like, that wasn't that difficult, dude. And you even like you started in a pretty good defensive position. And he was like, yeah. He was like, loads of people. He was like, literally, like almost everybody that comes through, they either panic and don't move at all, and then they just get surrounded and slaughtered, or they do the opposite and they kind of rush everybody out. They just send everybody to attack. And again, they get beaten by different classes in different situations. And he was like, there's not many people that have come through which split their forces and moved them to target individual things properly. And I was like, that's ridiculous. And he was like, yeah, it kind of is. And as I say, so I'm not saying this to kind of blow my own trumpet, although I kind of am. But I got a free T-shirt for it, so But like, but the point is it highlights this percentage difference about things that were quite honestly very, very simple. It's the ABCs, and it applies perfectly to Battlefield. The amount of games that you play where you're just like, Jesus Christ, come on. It's like it's basics. It's the basics, ABCs, and it's like so few people have that going on. And if they were able to properly implement some kind of ladder system, some kind of like proper balancing system into the game, the quality of the game and the overall quality of the just experience would go up exponentially. But they're not looking at doing anything like this with Hardline, so it's going to be quite some time. And yeah, I don't know what level BF has got planned for Hardline, but I know personally I really want to get a server going from day one, because I just figure it's the only way I'm going to get any kind of quality gameplay. So we'll have to see what happens there. But Daskro, you got any final thoughts about player quality or just community in general before we finish off here?
The one thing I would emphasize in all this is that is looking at or thinking about this entire conversation that we've had is this is not about the player base of years past was so much better than the player base of today. I actually like the idea of having a larger player base because you have a greater variety of players, and on top of that, if you have more players, it also means that you have the greater potential for more pro players to show up. And in my mind, that's what I'd love to be able to see more of. But at the same time, all this has to be done in a way to get people interested in playing and keep them interested in playing. And so I welcome with open arms more players playing the game. I want to make sure though that as we continue to grow, that everyone has a good time.
Absolutely. I fully agree with it, guys. And, I really want to hear what you think about this. I actually wasn't sure I was going to title this today, but I think it's going to be State of Battlefield 2014, because it's funny that the reason I sort of was thinking about all this stuff today was looking back at these other videos I've made seemingly year on year, where I talk about the state of the community. But I think this has been a really good discussion, and I think it does highlight a lot of the issues that I see and that I think about. And it's going to be interesting to see where we go with Hardline. I mean, in another 6 months' time, maybe I'll be talking about this again and seeing where we are right there, but we'll have to wait and see. So there's a lot of questions and there's a lot of factors that go into this. So as I say, I want to hear your thoughts about all of that. Balancing player base, loadouts, weapons, basic tenets of playing the game. The communities have passed and now there's loads of stuff going on here. So drop all your thoughts below. Always really interested to hear. Thanks to Daskro again for joining me today, Daskro.
Thank you much.
Always really, really good to have Daskro here for discussions, and I think you'll agree it'd be great if we can do some more. So I think we're going to try and do at least do at least maybe one of these a month where we sort of look at Battlefield or anything, because we've had some pretty interesting discussions about sort of real life topics as well. So I think we could talk about any of those things. So if you have some particular hot topics you want us to talk about, drop that below. This will be a podcast as usual, so it'll be up on SoundCloud as well as right here and available for download as well. So thanks for watching as always, guys. Go check out my channel and Daskro's as well, all in the links below. And I'll see you next time for some more discussion with the two of us. So thanks very much, guys. I'll see you then.